Good morning. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Got to put in our thinking caps. A lot of information. All right. Freilich. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shekalim Daf Vav. We're going to be learning about various scenarios where there was more than a half a shekel that was designated by the donor to be given to the Beis HaMikdash. We're going to be learning about what status does that surplus have, which will link us into the sugya of Hegdish B'Ta'us, the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. If a person was magdish something, if a person was consecrated something erroneously or based on a erroneous premise, whether it became Hegdish or not, we're gonna go into some beautiful agadata regarding Shekalim, connected to Shekalim. Tzarech Adam L'Shalesh Shikloi Gimel Pa'amim Bashana. A person is required to thrice giving his half a shekel. We will see soon what that means. And this is going to lead us generally into a basic discussion as what should be done with the surplus of all karbanos. If a person designated money to buy a chatos, and they bought a chatos, but there's some remaining money, and that goes to all the other karbanos. There are certain gavaldic rules. This will actually lead us into a more broad discussion, a broader discussion that we'll learn about tomorrow. We'll learn about on the next daf when a person designates money to charity, but the charity is for a certain purpose. What happens if there is a surplus of money? What may and what may not this money be used for? And on Davav Amid Beis, we're going to go back to a sugya that we had towards the end of Psachim. If a carbon Pesach was offered shaloi bizmanei, not in its correct time, then if you intended to bring it for shaloi l'shmoi, if you intended to bring it not for a Pesach, for something else, for a shlamim, for an oila, that actually it becomes a shlamim. The irony that a machsheves shaloi l'shmoi by a Pesach, shaloi bizmanei, renders the carbon into a shlamim. Actually, if you bring a carbon Pesach shaloi bizmanei, right, not on the right time, which is the 14th or the 14th in the afternoon, and you intend lishmai, you ruin it because you may not bring a Pesach in any other time other than an Erev Pesach. Some more details about that sugya and much, much more. Chavra, let us start on the Vav Amid Aleph. We left off all the way on top of the Amid by the Mishnah, what's called here Halacha Gimel, right? Says the Mishnah. Hamachanes Ma'ois. Hamachanes means a person who is saving money for his half a shekel. Saving money means, let's just presume that a half a shekel is 50 cents. So in the beginning, right, of the accumulation time, you start to designate 1 penny, and then you gather another penny, and you start accumulating money. So when the time comes for you to give the half a shekel, you will already have it. And at the beginning of the accumulation, you say these words. Now, the semantics are vitally important. And the person declares, these, he's speaking about the future, these which I am now and that I will accumulate will be for my shekel. Okay, and then every day he puts on a couple of pennies. Now, as we learned in the beginning of the Masechta, Be'echad Ba'adar Mashmiyam Al Ashkolim, so this Yid says, perfect, I already have money saved. But when he looks at the money, he notices, let's say that he has 55 cents. Or in other words, he has more than the needed half a shekel. What is the status of the surplus of the money? Now, what's important to appreciate is, number one, the declaration was made at the beginning of the time when he was accumulating. The money was not there yet, or all of the money was not there yet. And he said, Harei elu lishikli. Machlekes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, which is really the machlekes, whether we say that if someone consecrated anything based on a erroneous premise, whether, okay, it was an erroneous premise, but he declared it hegdish, whether the hegdish is effective or not. Beis Shammai says that it is effective. Yes, it's hegdish, but every yid should only give a half a shekel and not more. So the surplus will not be used for a half a shekel, but it's holy money. And what should you do with it? Moisaran nidava. Nidava means kates nisbeach. Remember this. Nidava means that the money belongs to a communal fund. And whenever the altar was sitting idle, in order for it not to be idle, from that fund, animals were bought and they were offered as a korban oila for the community. It was not a private his money, but it was holy money, linadava. However, based on the premise that Beis Hillel holds, hegdish b'tos lav shmei hegdish, he designated the money one coin at a time because he thought he needed it for his shekel. He didn't realize that he already has his 50 cents. He already has his half a shekel. And therefore, the money is bichlal, not holy at all. Chulin. However, continues the Mishnah, if the declaration that he makes at the beginning of the time that he's accumulating, that he's being machanes ma'os, is not hadei elu lishikli, but if the words are sha'ave mehen shikli, from the money that I'm beginning to save, I will bring my shekel. I will bring it mehen. Gavaldik. He never said that all of it will become a half a shekel. So therefore, Shavin, both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel will agree, Shahamai said that the surplus will be and remains chulin. And now the Mishnah will parallel something very similar, not regarding the half a shekel, but regarding a person who's separating or accumulating money to buy his or her korban chatas. And if they say elu lechatasi, again, the person knows that an animal will cost, let's say, $1,000. They don't have $1,000. They're starting to save whatever amount of money. And at the beginning of saving the money, they say elu lechatasi. This is like the first case in the Mishnah. So says the Mishnah, Shavin, here also Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel will agree that the moisar, if there is a surplus, meaning if the person bought an animal and they didn't need all the money that they accumulated, and there's leftover money, that money has to go nidava. See, unlike, as the Mishnah will explain, a shekel, that everyone has a fixed amount, right, and you don't add to it, there is no predetermined amount of money that needs to be spent, right? Certainly not an upper limit when it comes to a chatas. Certain korbanos have an under limit. Certain korbanos don't even have a lower limit, but there's no upper limit. And since he said, these are for my chatas, so this money has to be used for a chatas. But hold on, if I did not sin, I don't bring a korban chatas, fine. So taka won't be for, it will be for a nadava. However, if the person says, like in the second case of the Reisha, of the mehen, I'm accumulating money to bring from it for chatasi. So then again, Shav and everyone agrees, shahamoiset is chulin if there is a surplus of money. And now Rav Shimon explains why we differentiate between a shekel and the chatas. Amar Rabbi Shimon, I'll tell you why. Ma bein shkalim lechatas. Ella shel shkalim, the giving, the obligation of giving of a shekel, yesh lahem kitzvah has a set limit, half a shekel, not more. However, lechatos ein lahem kitzvah. That's why in the first case, when he says elu lechatasi, even Beis Hillel is moida that by chatos that the moiser is nadava. Says Rabbi Yehuda against Rav Shimon, your logic I reject. He's not debating with the din of the Mishnah, but he's saying that it's not a good logic. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, don't think that the shekel has such a fixed amount the way everyone thinks. It's not exactly that way. And he brings a historical fact that when we went back towards the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash from Babel or from Paras back into Eretz Yisrael and to Yerushalayim, and there the temple needed more than the half a shekel per person, Pashut, because less people were donating. So they gave a half of a darkoin. When it says darkoinos, it doesn't mean that they gave a full darkoin. No one ever gave more than a half of the currency, but they used a much higher currency. A darkoin actually has a value of two sela. So a half a darkoin is one sela. And then when more Yidden began to give the annual half a shekel, they went down and they used as the coin a sela, and they gave a half a sela. And then chazru likshol tabo'in. Actually, tabo'ah, right? We have a mishpachas tabi here. Tabo means a half a shekel. What it really was a half a shekel b'imei Moshe. And then there were so many Yidden. Not that they lived in Israel. Sadly, most of the Jews did not live in Eretz Yisrael during the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, but many more Yidden were participating in chutz la'aretz. So big shul go be not in. They wanted to go down. In other words, they were constantly using another coinage as the one whole one, and they were going to give half of it. But that would have meant they would have been given really a half a shekel. That already was not accepted. In other words, that we may never give less than what was given in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu. But as long as everyone is giving the same, and it is a half of a larger number, right? So is it a half a dollar or is it a half of $100 bill? It has to be a half of something. But you can give more. Everyone has to be the same, but you can give more. Point of Rabbi Yehuda is that you can't say that a shekel mamish has no upper limit. If everyone would be told by the Beis Din to give a larger half, then the money that you separated might have been used for a shekel, right? You can't say that because there is a fixed amount, so it's hegdish betos. That logic, that explanation does not fit. But Rab Shimon rejects the kasha of Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rab Shimon, apol pikein, yad kulam shava. I'm just explaining to you why shekel is different than a chatos, because by a shekel, everyone has to give the same amount. And therefore, this year, if the half a shekel was the biblical half a shekel, the half a shekel that they give in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, and this person who began to accumulate the money said, Harei elu l'shikli, and then he added and he accumulated more than needed, that's tos. Masha enkin avol chatos, there is no upper limit. One person can buy an animal worth a selah. The other one can bring an animal worth 2 solaim. The other one can bring an animal worth 3 solaim. So Rab Shimon stands with his explanation that differentiates between a shekel and a chatos. Says the Gemara, ha-mechanes v'chulei. Rabbi Yossi, in the name of Rabbi Lezer, again, there's no aleph here in Yerushalmi, says that ma pligin, where does Misham and Basilil argue? This is Gavaldik. Only b'mechanes peroit roit, exactly the way we explained the Mishnah. The person is collecting the coins, one coin at a time. And the statement that he made was when he began to collect the coins before he had the total amount. Aval, however, if a person already has in front of him a bag of coins and they put their hand in it and they lift in their hands a chunk of coins and they take a think that they only have a half a shekel, 50 cents, but they already have more. They already have it in their hand, and they say, like we have in the first case in the Mishnah, Elu l'shikli, these are for my shkalim. Even Beisilil, Kol Ama Moidish, that Moisaran will be Nidavam. Moisaran will be Nidava. What will be the difference? Explains the Tiklin Chadatin. Let's look inside the Tiklin, 11 lines from the top of the Tiklin, which is already towards the middle of the page. Like we explained, he fills his hand with money and he says, on all the money in the hand, these are for my shkalim. Then and then he counts it and he discovers there are 55 pennies, there are 60 pennies, there was more than a half. What mistake is there? He had all the coins in his hand and he said that these should be for my shekel. Now, I know that you can't give more than the fixed amount. We know that. So the more, the moisad won't go for shekels. But it's, you said this is, you wanted all of it to become consecrated, and indeed, it will all become consecrated. Excuse me, so holds Rabbi Yossi in the name of Rabbi Lezer. Now, really, we have a machlokes as to what does Rabbi Lezer say. Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Biba in the name of Rabbi Lezer says that mapligin. Where do they argue? Also, the way we said the mechanis beproitreit, that he was collecting the money piecemeal, one coin at a time. He never his declaration elu lishikli was before he had all the coins. Elu lishikli, but like we said, if there's already a pile of money and he puts his hand in it, and he says regarding everything in his hand before he counted it, these are for my shkalim. Here it's the opposite. Everyone is maida that what the maisaran chulin. Even Beishamai will be maida that if there is a surplus, it's chulin. Says again the tiklin 60 lines from the top. Hoyel the ein kantos. There is no mistake, right? There's no mistake here. He's saying whatever is in my hand is for my shekel. But this logic is God said half a shekel, 50 pennies, let's say, not more. So it's called masna mashra kosov balteira. This cannot be for if God said a half of a shekel and the lo yarbe, you can't be marbe. Now, it doesn't mean that the entire statement is nonsensical. No, the half a shekel from your hand will be the amount of a half a shekel will become mugdash l'chatzi shekel. But the Meiser will be chulin. Gavaldik hamachloek is between two Amiroim b'shem as what is the sheet of Rab Lezer. Amar Rab Chia. That our Mishnah is going to be a Messiah will substantiate the version of Rab Bibi's version of Rab Lezer, which is the latter one that we learned, which is that Moisaron is chulin, because it says in our Mishnah, Reb Shimon explaining why is there a difference between shekel and chatos. Ma bin shkolom chatos, elo shashkolom yeshlam kitzvah, and chatos doesn't have an upper limit. Kitzvah. Now the Gemara is saying ma anan kaimin. What case are we referring to? The havamina, the premise of this siyua is we're trying to find a case where Rab Shimon is explaining a shita of both Beishamai and Beisilo. Based on that premise, we're going to have a siyua Rab Bibi. When we learned the Mishnah, which is what the Gemara is going to say at the end, Rab Shimon is just explaining why does Beisilo differentiate. But based on the havamina that he's explaining, when does everyone hold regarding the shkalim? Everyone will hold that Moisaron will be Nadava. Which is the second case of the Mishnah. No, that can't be, because the Mishnah says explicitly, Kol amma moidei shahamoisaron chulin. Right, similarly, then again, Kol amma moidei shahamoisar chulin. And Rab Shimon is explaining the difference between chatos and shekel. He can't be speaking about a scenario where they have actually the same thing. Ela kain anan kayomin. The case that Rab Shimon is explaining is bo'omer elu l'shikli. And again, we're trying to elu l'shikli and shkolim al yidei shekitzvasan min haTorah. This is Rab Shimon's explaining. Since the Torah gives a limit, therefore moisaran chulin. That's l'kula alma. Again, the havamina is he's explaining shitas kula alma. Unlike chatos, since al yidei she'en kitzvasan min haTorah moisaran nidava. So zaraya that there is a scenario in the Mishnah where everyone is maida, that moisaran is going to be chulin, which is the second version of, which is the version of Rav Bibi, and not the version of Rabbi Yosi b'shem Rabbi Lezer that says that in a case where everything was in your hand, moisaran nedava. So now this will actually be a question on Rabbi Yosi. So the Gemara says, so ma avod Rabbi Yosi b'shem Rabbi Eliezer. So the Gemara says no. That Pasallah, he'll explain the Mishnah that Rabbi Shimon's explanation is not on a case that everyone agrees. He's explaining Shitas Beis Hillel, that the Mechanes befroitreit, and that was the first case of the Mishnah, that Beis Hillel says, based on the rule of Hekdesh B'tos, Moisaran Chulin, and why is it that Moisaran Chulin by Shkolim, and by the Moisaran of Chatos, it's going to be Linadava? That's the explanation, because a shekel has a limited amount, so therefore the surplus is B'tos. And chatas, well, you could have bought an animal for $100, but you can spend $1,000. So what mistake is there over here? We're going to have a Mishnah Garden today, Davavam and Beis, where it says clearly, Moiser Shkolim is chulin. So Pasalah, again, he'll explain that Mishnah is not speaking L'Kola Alma. That Mishnah is continuing, reviewing, reiterating the case of the Reisha, the Mechanas Befreit. Uke Beis Hillel, that Moisaran is, that Moiser Shkolim is going to be chulin. Very good. Now we're going to skip the parentheses. Continues the Gemara. Hamafre shikla is something similar. A person separated their half a shekel. Again, the Gemara doesn't call it a half, we call it a shekel. It means a half a shekel. And v'sava shu chayiv. The reason why I separated my half a shekel is because I did not remember now that I already gave this year's half shekel. I thought I'm chayiv. After I designated the money, this is my half a shekel. I chapped, go out, I already gave it. V'nimsa she'ena chayiv. So based on the shita of Beis Hillel, my friends, hegdish b'to'us, lo yishmei hegdish, so like kadash, the new half a shekel is nothing. Hamafre shnayim, however, if I designate two at the same time, and v'savar shehu chayiv, and I think that I'm chayiv too. Why would I be chayiv too? Because I didn't give this year, and I think I didn't give last year. And yes, you have to pay for the last year. No, it doesn't go into the kasa of tikl and chadatin, we'll learn later, but you have to give it. So I separated two, thinking I'm chayiv too at the same time. And now, last year I gave, I only have to give this year's. Now these two cases are different according to this opinion, Because when you already gave and what you designated was of zero significance, you were not chayiv at all. That's hegdish betos. When I separated 2 at a time, even though I was only chayiv to give 1, but 1 I was chayiv, so at least some of my designation right away was an obligation designation. So maybe the other one gets chapped in with it. It was done together. It's even unlike the case of the Reish of the Mishnah. When you accumulate a coin at a time, when you didn't hit the 50 cents, you're chayiv. Once you hit the 50 cents, that coin that you threw into the bag was completely exempt. Here you did it together. Oisa hasheni ma ovedlei. What should you do? Says the Gemara, Nashma'in and Min Hadol. Let's answer it from the following Braisa. It says, Hamafresh hifresh chatosoi. Again, v'sofar shu chayiv, v'nimtzo she'ena chayiv. That's a classical case of hegdish betos. So then, like kachah, but hegdish tayim, and the person thought that they're chayiv to bring 2 chatois, v'sofar shu chayiv shtayim, and then after they made the designation, mamish the same by a chatos, v'nimtzo she'ena chayiv ala achas. So oiso shniya ma'at ovidlo. And what do you do with that? So it's not nothing. It's not chulin. The second one, now don't forget, guys, by chatos, actually there are 5 chatois hamesos, but here is going to be one of those exceptional cases where it's holy, but you can't bring it, because if I didn't sin, I can't bring a chatos. It's chulin ba'zara, but the animal has to be led to the pasture, and we have to wait until it gets blemished, and then it's sold, and with its money you buy a carbon kates lamizbeach nedava eloroya, and that is the case. That is the case. So now we're making a comparison. So just like by a chatas, if it was 2 at a time, even based on those who hold, like Beis hegdish betos, lo yishmei hegdish. But since you were chayiv for 1, so since there was a chiyuv on the person, it's chal on both. So hachinami elu should be linadavam. L'cha'oida counters the Gemara. No. L'cha heich oimer ato elu. How? According to you, how do you understand the top case of the Mishnah? The Reish of the Mishnah had a Elul Shikli. The Gemara rejects that there is a difference whether when you gave it, was there any chiyuv on you, or whether there was no chiyuv on you. Doesn't make a difference. The Mishnah begins telling us that the moment you go over your chiyuv, Mesilel, Hegdish Betos, is chulin. So therefore, he doesn't make that difference. Even if you were mafresh 2 at a time, and one of the 2 where you were taka obligated, the one for which you were not obligated, according to him, you're not. It will be chulin. Next, Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, another interesting.
Rabbi,
point. Yes.
Does Brera come into this discussion here?
No.
Meaning, like retroactively, you didn't intend to give it. It was a.
I would say that you don't even need Brera when you subscribe to Hegdish Betos, Lav Shmei Hegdish. If you were not mechuyev, the declaration from the outset was nonsensical. Brera would only be needed when, okay, if there's 2 animals, and taka, we're paskening that we hold that one of them is lachatas, one is linadava. So now the question is, which one is which? Which one is which? So Bereda would mean that if I decide tomorrow that the one to the right is a chatas, it meant that from the outset it was a chatas, and there might be enough kaminas. That would be Bereda. Let's go back over here. No olives, no haze. I know that nowadays some people are called Yehuda and some people are called Yuda. But here we're putting them all together. Rabbi Yuda Oimer Chulei. So now that the Mishnah mentioned that a fact that historically it wasn't that we always gave the exact half of shekel. We were never allowed to give less than that value. It always has to be a half of, according to Rabbi Yehuda. But it can be a half of a darkoin. So now, first of all, the Gemara clarifies the meaning of those coinages mentioned in the Mishnah. Darkoinois refer to dinarim. And my friends, it doesn't mean a dinar. It means a golden dinar, which had the value of 2 saloim. So the darkoin had the value of 2 saloim. And in the beginning, less people were contributing. So everyone gave a half of a darkoin, which had the value of 1 selah. Then chazru lik shkoil, and then when more people were participating, then the complete currency from which they gave half was a selah, and they gave a half a selah. Now, what is this Elohim? So the Gemara says that's kishemu on the way it sounds, a selah. Chazru lishkoil taboin. Now, what's taboin? A taboin is a palgei seloim, and they gave half of that. And that is exactly what we gave in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu. But later, bikshu lishkol a dinar, not to give a dinner. to use dinar as the whole coin and to give a half of that. What is a dinar? Kiratum. Kiratum means a quarter. A dinar is a quarter of a seller. For dinarim in one seller. However, the Basin said, no, that's too little. And from where do we know that from? Min Hadar, we see this from the following verse, that there is a certain minimum amount, aside of the fact that everyone has to give the same amount has to be at least of a certain minimum amount. It says in the Nehemiah that the Hamidenu Aleinu, that we took upon ourselves, mitzvos, lases, shlishis, hashekel, bishana, to give at least a third of a darkain, which is actually a little bit more than the half a shekel from the times of Moshe. But that third was a half of a certain coin, and everyone gave the same amount. From there we see, in other words, that they did at the end say that there is a minimum amount. Now everyone subscribes to the fact that everyone has to give the same amount. There's no machlokes about it. Here Rabbi Yehuda is adding, but that same amount doesn't have to be a half a shekel. It can be that or more. And now we'll see, not so pashut. Now, not so pashut meaning, did they argue with that historical fact? I don't know. But the Gemara says the following. We're going to have a Yaragadat until the end of the Amid, which is mamish connected to this question, so to say. Says the Gemara, Rab Chilkia in the name of Rab Acha, Mikan. First of all, the fact that we have this pasuk in the Nehemiah, and they refer to the mitzvah of the shekel, of the half a shekel, as a third of. So there's something about thricing it. That's a word in English. Mikan shetzarich adam l'shalesh shikla gimel palam b'shana. You have to give your shekel 3 times a year. Now, we're not speaking about the mitzvah of a half a shekel. This is very important. That Rambam actually paskins that you give the half a shekel once. You can't give a little bit and then another little bit. You give it once. L'shalei shikli means not in the context of giving the half a shekel, which is a biblical obligation. When Yidden give tzedakah, a person should not separate money once a year. We should be giving tzedakah at least 3 times a year. Now, the Rebbe educated us. We should be giving tzedakah many times every day. It can be a very small amount to have on your desk, a pushka that Rebbe wanted, everywhere. Constantly give. But if a person doesn't yet have that minig, it's not about the sum total amount. I'm going to give every year. God willing, you're going to earn here in LA. To live, you need to earn $10 million to survive. I'll give $1 million. I'll give my meiser money once a year. Give it at least over 3 times a year. And really, that's connected to raising money for Yom Tov for the community, which is 3 times a year. It comes from this. Another mikan. It's mikan she'ein matrichin al tzibur yosef yilvam b'shada. That you're not allowed to make more than 3 fundraisers a year from the same institution. And I don't know if you know, when Mishulachim come to us, they're so good. They're learning.
Hello.
The Mishulach says,
hi, honey.
The Mishulach says, oh, I only came last year. I wasn't here for a whole year. He's alluding to this. He's really saying, really, I could have come to you 3 times, but I'm nice. I love you. I only come once a year. And then he comes with the check, how much you gave him last time. All right, so that's number 2. Weiter. Omar Rab Oven. Mikan, another remiz that we have from the pasuk in the Nehemiah, and this is something that we'll speak about in more detail later. There's not enough time, but we already mentioned that in the Beis Hamikdash we gave the Shekalim into a chamber, but it was removed from that chamber. Trumas Halishka, it was removed 3 times a year, and there were many 3s. It was removed 3 times a year, and there were 3 baskets. There was a lot of 3s connected. So mikan to the gimel sa'in, that's the measurement of a basket, right? Mikan that there were 3 separate kupais, and mikan that there were 3 afrashes, all based on this concept of thricing the giving of the half a shekel. Weiter says the Gemara. It says, Zayitnu kolel apikudim, Rabbi Yehuda v'Rab Nehemiah, Chad Omar, why a half a shekel? Lefi shechatu b'machzis hayoim. The chet egel happened. We're focusing on the half of the day. Now, half of the day was 6 hours into the day, but we're focusing not on the number 6, but the machzis. That's why, since there was a kapara to the chet egel associated with the machzis hashekel, every year, that's why we give half a shekel to remember the sin wasn't half a day. The other one says chad amar or charna, right? The way it's written here in Yerushalmi, charna amar lefi shechatu b'sheish sha'os. Same time, they're not arguing when the sin happened, but they're focusing on the 6th hour of the day. Therefore, yitnu machzas hashekel. What's half a shekel connected to 6? The avat shita garamisin. Garamisin is the name of a coin, and 6 of these garamisin make up the half a shekel. Now, chevra halka. If we're going to say that you were never allowed to give more than the half a shekel, right? That's connected to the shita, because you can't give more than the shita garmison. According to Rabbi Yehuda, right, that says that they gave once a half a darkoin. A half a darkoin was more than 6 garmison, but he is the one that is not looking at the value of the 6 garmison. He's looking at the fact that it was half. I don't care if it's a half a darkoin or if a half a sela or half a tabot. It's half. Half is machzat sayim. Rabbi Yeshua Bey, Rabbi Nechemia, Rabbi Yeshua of the yeshiva of Rabbi Nechemia says in the name of Rabbi Yechanan and Zakai. Another thing, the fisha avru al aseres hadibris. That's good to know. It's sad to know, but it's important to know that during the Chet Egel, it wasn't just a sin connected to God, Rahman al-Islam, idolatry, right? The sin of the golden calf was really a sin connected to all of the Aseres Hadibris, as we have.
Rabbi, can I ask a quick question? Can I ask a quick question?
Quickly, yeah.
Aren't we supposed to give tzedakah every day? Is there a commandment to give tzedakah every day?
The minimum. But let me say different, Baruch. Aside of giving tzedakah, like we mentioned, every day, many times a day, smaller amounts, I think that if a person gives large checks to tzedakah, they should give those checks 3 times a year.
Thank you.
And an institution, that's what it says, Moisid should not make more than 3 fundraisers a year. Now, if they're doing a service of setting out Purim shuttles, that's not a fundraiser, even though it makes a lot of money. That's providing a service. That's a whole different thing. I don't know about that. Let's go back to. Now, so the half a shekel, again, the half a shekel, not the half a darkoin. Here, the half a shekel had also the value of 10 geta, so there's a 10. Rabbi Berechia and Rabbi Levi in the name of Rabbi Shimon Lakish says, now we're going to Inyan, but we're going to come back. We're going to jump to Pidyon Haben. That Lefi shemachru b'chayre shel Rachel. Who's the b'chayre of Rachel? Yosef HaTzadik. Since we sold him, be'esrim kasef. So therefore, and that's exactly what it is. In other words, 5 soloim is the esrim kasef. And now, coming back to our din, and Rav Pinchas, B'Shem Rav Levi says, let's go back to the same sale of Yosef, which is be'esrim kasef. But let's go that there were 10 people there, even though there weren't really 10 people there, but let's go there were 10 people there, and each one got, right?
Rabbi, how did Chet Egel was connected to all the
I don't know. Ich weiß nicht. I don't know how. In other words, what we're learning over here is that it wasn't Yakir that the golden calf in itself was the only thing that they did. That when it says v'kamu l'tzachek, there's no pratim. Once that boundary was broken, the decline, one thing led to the other, was very quick. And during that celebration, amongst everyone was violated on. It could be. I don't think there's an inyan to record the pratam and to remember it, but we should know that there was a breach of all the 10 libras. So coming back over here, that's it. When we sold b'chayre shel Yerachel, be'esrim kasen and v'nafal l'chol echad taba'a, that's the half a shekel. It's everyone received. So lefikach yekol echad yechad nois and shikloi taba'a, we give the half a shekel. Let's go chavru to Davav Amid Beis, a jam-packed daf. Now the Mishnah begins reiterating the first thing we learned today. The whole Davav, guys, that's a machaya. It's about surplus. So we began learning about the surplus of a shekel. And what did we learn? Moiser shkalim chulin. And let's go that this statement doesn't have to be l'kula alma. That's the first case of the Mishnah. Before you began to accumulate, you're putting one coin in the bag and another coin in the bag and another coin. You're saying everything that I'm accumulating, harei elu lishikli, and Beis Hillel holds that hegdish betos, lav shmei hegdish. So Moiser shkalim chulin. But what about Moiser asida so'efa? And I'll tell you already the end game. A kohen gadol needs to bring every day chavitim. So you have every kohen brings a minchas chinuch. That means the first day that he works in the Beis Hamikdash, he brings a carbon mincha, half brought in the morning, half brought in the afternoon. And the kohen gadol, the gedul of the kohen gadol, al pi chasidus, was that every day was mamish nu for him. Every day was kachadash mamish. So every day the kohen gadol brings out what we call the chavite kohen gadol. Half in the morning, half in the afternoon. Money is coming from his home. He designated money to buy the chavitim, and there's surplus. So what happens to that? Likewise, moiser kinei zovim, kinei zovis, kinei yoldos, chatois v'ashamois. All karbanos, the common denominator is, even though they're not only a chatos, right? The bird karbanis, guys, we're going to learn Masechtas Kingdom. That's going to make Shekalim look like a walk in the park over here. That there's one oila, one chatas, but there's one chatas. And this Tana holds that there is a pasuk that uses the word chatas regarding the chavite kohen gadol. So there's a rule that if money is designated for a chatas and there is a surplus, the surplus is holy, but meisadam nidava. And indeed, zehaklal kol shuba l'shem chatas, and also same thing mishum ashama, meisadam nidava. Nidava means it's going to be used for a communal carbon oila that will be brought when the mizbeach is sitting idle. Beautiful. Now, moised oila is an oila. That's a private oila. That's not nidava. Nidava is an oila, but it's a communal oila. If I separated money from my oila, it's not chatos. Even though before kinei zavim is chatos and oila, but it's also chatos. So then it chaps all the money is lachatos, nidava. But if I designate money for an oila and I buy an animal and there's extra money, or moiser mincha, so it's an oila, then I have to wait until when I bring another oila and I use it for my oila. Moiser mincha le mincha, moiser shlamim for my private shlamim, moiser pesach gavaldik. Coming back to pesach. So don't say, listen, I put inside in this casa, in this account, I put in $1,000 for my carbon pesach. I only needed 500. So I might have said, okay, next year I also have to bring a carbon pesach. So let me keep my money for my pesach for next year, like oila, right? Mincha, shlamim, nisht azoy by pesach. Moiser pesach has to go l'shlamim. And that's going to really lead us into a review of what we had towards relatively the end of Pesachim. And we had this halach a few times in Pesachim that forget about the surplus of money. B'chlal, if I have an animal itself, I have a carbon Pesach. When the Pesach is brought shaloi bizmanoi, then it becomes a shlamim with the details that we'll review again. Does it automatically become a shlamim? Do you have to uproot it from its designation? Do you have to uproot it dafka l'shem shlamim? Or even if you only have in mind l'shem oila, perfect. You uprooted it from the Pesach by having in mind oila, and it becomes a shlamim. But since the Pesach becomes a shlamim, so the money, surplus of money of Pesach should not be left until next year to buy a Pesach. It's used l'shlamim. Now, Moise Nazirim.
Rabbi.
Yes, let's go quick. It's mamash
Yeah.
yeah.
Right now, the way we're understanding, if you set aside money for a chatas and there's excess, that goes to the Beis Hamikdash and they use it for Ketz HaMizbeach.
Yes.
But if you do it for a personal, whatever, mincha or oila or the other ones, then the excess, you have to hold on to it and buy another one whenever you have to buy another one.
It has to be used for an oila, correct. Very
but
good.
we don't know the reason for the distinction at this point.
If I'm not mistaken, it's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai regarding the chatos. The chiddush is by the chatos. Everything else makes sense because you designated it for an oila. This will lead us into a Mishnah we're going to have in the next daf, which is mamish negeya, even bisman hagolus, when you have a tzedakah fund and it's for a specific purpose. It's the same concept. And money was given for that purpose. So and there's a surplus. So what
Rabbi,
exactly?
Has there ever been a surplus on a building campaign? Probably not.
A building campaign, no, because the building never finishes. That's something else. But when you have to buy an animal and you bought the animal, so now what you do with the money? Now, Moise Nazirim means, guys, it's already tzedakah. Not an individual. We made a collection in the shul for people that are Nazirim. And at the end of your Nazirus, you have to bring a chatos and an oila. Just remember that klal. Whenever there's a chatos and an oila, first chatos, then oila and a shlamim. But some Nazirim are poor and they cannot afford their karbanis. So we made a fundraiser for Nazirim. And the money was given to one Nazir, but there was extra money. So what? So the remaining of the money will go to Nazirim. Now, if there'll be another Nazir tomorrow or in 50 years, I don't care. Money designated for Nazirim has to be used to help poor Nazirim buy their karbanis. But Meiser Nazir, but what happens if there was a fundraiser for one individual, for Chaim Yankel? And we knew he became a Nazir, and we said, he's not going to have money to buy the karbanis. We fundraised for him. We gave him the money. He bought the 3 karbanis, chatos, oila, shlamim, and there's a surplus. It's not for Nazirim, it's for him. So here again, we don't say, well, he's a young person. He might become a Nazir tomorrow or in 20 years. So if he'll become a Nazir again, we'll save the money for him. That you don't do. I know we
this is more like chatas in a way, right?
We fundraised for him for this vow. And this vow was paid for. So based on the klal we had before, Danny, very good, that one of the three karbanos is for echatos, just like we had before kinei zavim. I don't need all of it to be echatos. Some of it is echatos, so the surplus goes linadava. Givaldik says the Holy Gemara. Omar Rabbi Yosi, guys, another good klal, and we're still. I know that Shekalim will fly by quick, but Rabbi Yosi is referred to in Talmud Bavli as Rab Asi. Right, Rab Ami, Rab Asi, they're two colleagues, Talmidei Rabbi Yochanan. So he in Talmud Bavli is called Rab Asi. In Talmud Yerushalmi is called Rabbi Yosi. So Omar Rabbi Yosi, Ano ad da ano tamon. I love it. While I will still veer. Now we're in Yerushalayim, my friends. We're in the Holy Land. Tamon now means bubble. While I was still there, while I was still in bubble, Shamis Ichogehert. The voice of Rabbi Yehuda. I didn't see it, but I heard the voice of Rabbi Yehuda that was asking Shmuel, right, his second teacher, or the teacher that he had after Rav, Hifrish Shiklev Omeis, a case that the Mishnah doesn't mention. A person designated the shekel, and before giving it to the gizber, that's the key, he passes away. What do you do with it? So you know what Shmuel said? My friends, halt cup. What is the carbon tzibur used for? Amongst other things, chatos, it's not only used for communal oilers. There is also chatos hatzibur. And what did we learn in the Mishnah? The rule that chatos goes l'nadava, moiser chatos, doesn't mean that all of it was lachatos. If there was some chatos involved, then all of it goes l'nadava. So that same logic he applied over there. Beautiful. Amalei yipl l'nadava. Now explaining the case in the Mishnah of the moiser asira so'efa, because the asira so'efa, to make it aligned with everything else, has to be connected to a chatos. So says the Gemara, moiser asira so'efa shaloi. What is done with it? What is done with the excess of the kohen gadol's asira so'efa? Now you can say, one second, the Mishnah speaks about it. I know, but they had this discussion, and Rabbi Yochanan says, Yoy lichem liyam hamelech. Nothing. You can't have any benefit from it. It has to be destroyed. Rabbi Lezer Amar Yiplul in Adava. Now, if you learned our Mishnah, you would right away jump, as we all should, and say, what are you saying? Rabbi Lezer is the Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan is going against the Mishnah. The way the Yerushalmi words it is not Meisvei, it says the opposite. The wording are Masnisa Pliga al Rabbi Yochanan. The Mishnah argues with Rabbi Yochanan. Again, you have to get used to the way we're thinking. The Mishnah refutes Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is an Amoira. You can't argue with the Mishnah. But what is it? And we're quoting the Mishnah. Moiser Shekalim Chulin. Moiser Asira Su'efa. Moiser Kinei Zavim. V'Kinei Zavis. Moiser Kinei Yoldes. V'Chatois. V'Ashamis. All of them is Moisarim Nadava, including Moiser Asira Su'efa. So Ma Ovid La Rabbi Yochanan. Answers the Gemara. That Rabbi Yochanan does not understand that the Mishnah's Asira Su'efa is the Chavite Kohen Gadol. Chavite Kohen Gadol, the mincha that the Kohen Gadol brings every day is not a chatos. How is it a chatos? It's kache kachim. It's a mincha, but it's a carbon mincha. You know what our Mishnah is referring to? If you remember, at the end of Parshas Vayikra, you have certain times a person's type of animal depends on their financial standing. But many times it's only two options, animals or birds. But there are three cases in the Torah, even for individuals, the carbon oil of a yored, for which Hashem gives three options: wealthy, poor, or impoverished. And there, the option that's even more affordable than birds is flour. And there we're speaking about a carbon chatas without going through all the pratim. So he understood that our Mishnah is speaking about moiser asira so efa shel minchas chodesh shel kol Yisrael. That's taka chatas. Everyone agrees to the rule that money that was designated for a chatas, if there's a surplus of money, it goes linadava. However, Rabbi Yochanan does not accept that the asira so efa of our Mishnah is referring to the chaviti kohen gadol. That's called a carbon mincha, not called a carbon chatas. Rabbi Yosi Amar the following: that Aldo Olil Abba Barba. On the following, we didn't quote the following, on the following Braisa, did Abba Barba have a challenge? Right, that's the Olil. He had a question. Now, Bekitzer, Abba Barba, what did we learn? That in Yerushalmi, we're missing olives. Abba Barba is Abba Bar Abba, and it's good to know this. Abba Bar Abba was the father of Shmuel. He's not referred to in Talmud Bavli as Abba Bar Abba. And we learned in Kedushin Daf Ayin Gimel, Gavaldik, a little piece of a Midrash. What happened was like this, that the father of Shmuel, Abba Bar Abba, he lived then in Bavel, right? Shmuel was from Bavel. He traveled to Eretz Yisrael. while he was in Eretz Yisrael, he walked by what used to be called a witch. Today it's called a psychic, a person with a sixth sense. They make it sound so fancy. And this witch, she was a woman, and she tells the father, she tells Abba, I will pay you a fortune of money for you to have a relation with me. Now, tonight. Why? Because I see that if you will have a relation with a woman tonight, you will sire a child who's going to be the greatest man that ever lived. So what did he do? Like we mentioned, we're not allowed to go to these witches, but if they came to us, some of the info is not that off. What he did was he went to Babel that night. How did he get to Babel that night? So Tosfos says that he used one of God's holy names. And he kritzas haderech. And he came home and he had a relation with his wife, and then he used the Shem Kodesh to return to Eretz Yisrael. That's a whole topic. Like for now, we learned it one Shavuos night, and she got pregnant. And people in Babel were thinking the husband was not home. Is the haraya that the child is a non-legitimate child? So that's why in the Bavli we call him the father of Shmuel. Yerushalmis, they use Shemer Kodesh the whole time. For them, it wasn't even, no one was even Choishish. So then they called him by his name, Abba Bar Abba. Okay, so Abba Bar Abba had the following challenge on the what? The Inun Amrin. It says over there, recording here, or they say in Babel, Minayin, they say over there in Babel, Minayin Shah Pesach Mishnah Lishleim Shlamim, which means, like we said in the Mishnah, if you shecht a Pesach, Shaloi Bizmanoi, let's get familiar with the words, not in its correct time. So it becomes a shlamim. How do they know that? So they quoted Talmud Loimer because it says in the beginning of Vayikra, "Ve'im min hatzoin karbonoi." Now, really, it's a parsha of shlamim. But the Torah opens up with the if from hatzoin, from the flocks. Just to know, there's bakar, which is cattle, right, which is oxen and cows, and tzoin, flocks, includes sheep and goats. Good to remember. So the im min hatzoin karban l'zevach teaches there in Bavli, the Babylonian says, you know what that pasuk is alluding to? Kol shehu min hatzoin, some other carbon that comes from hatzoin. What is hatzoin again? Sheep and goats. Which carbon can come from either this or that of Pesach? That the pasuk is telling you, bashlamim. This is what they teached in Babel. That's their source that they were looking for in the Chumash. To this halacha, no one is debating the halacha that ha-Pesach shaloi b'zmanoi changes to become a shlamim, but that was their source. So on that, did Abba Barba hey sivun in Talmud Bavli is meisvei. He challenged that. He says, hold on, an oila can also come from tzoin. So why, if the source is that pasuk, why do you say that a Pesach is mishtana l'shem shlamim? Why did you say that an oila? That a Pesach shaloi b'zmanoi should become an oila. So answers the Gemara, no, Abba Barba, no, it's not a kasha, because I know that an oila can come both from sheep and from goats, but you know what? An oila can also come from cattle. It's not exclusively only from tzoin. Davar she'eino ba ela min hatzoin is included in this pasuk, is being merumas in this pasuk, which is the Pesach. You're right that an oila can be from a sheep or from a goat, but it can also be from cattle. But Abba Barba was not happy yet. He still challenged, hey Sivun. He says, Harei Asham. Now an Asham can only come, now really there are 6 Ashamais. All of them have to be from sheep. There's a question as to whether they have to be kavasim, which is within the first year, or an ayol, a ram, a male sheep that's after 13th month, not the pilgas, until the end of the second year, but it's either or, but it's only sheep. Harei Asham, Asham is only from tzoin, Asham is not from bakar. So here again, they answered him, Amar Avbun Bar Kahana, you're right. Min hatzoin is not from one of the types of tzoin. Min hatzoin has to mean from both options of tzoin. Dolar shehu ba mikol hatzoin, and that's a Koren Pesach. But that cannot include an Asham. Don't tell me that if you have a Pesach, Shaloi B'zmani, it becomes an Asham. That's the pasuk is not alluding to that. She'ein ba ela min ha'elim or min ha'kavasim bilvad. Really, there's a machlekes in Gersois because some Ashamais have to be dafka young ones when they are in the first year. Some of them have to be in their second year after the 13th month passed. But it's never allowed to come from goats. Still asks the Gemara, I don't understand this whole limud. B'chol asar, every time at Omar we say that the word min in the Torah is coming to exclude, it's only from Mashgacha Pratis. We're learning this in Parshas Vayikra. The whole beginning, everything is to exclude, right? Min hanevad, min from a yid that's a mumar, min is always excluding. Min lamayit and kan. The word min is coming to include. Doesn't make sense. In other words, we are excluding an asham because an asham taka comes from tzoin. An asham cannot come from bakar, but it can only come from one of the two categories of tzoin. Adarabah, who cares? Why does it have to dafka mean a Pesach? Why does it have to dafka include that which is from all of the tzoin? Min is a exclusionary word, right? Amarav mana hachinami. No, the word min is lamiut. And what does miut mean? That a Pesach cannot come from all types of tzoin. For example, she'ein ba ben shtei shanim has to be within the first year. Another miut that we have by Pesach, she'ein ba MERCAVA. So in other words, we're not including. We min is taka excluding. I v'gaba asham nami min lamayitu she'ein ba elam and elam ulvad. Right? Why don't we say that? V'gaba asham nami min lamayitu she'ein ba elam min ha'elam bilvad. Oh, so now without learning the tikkun, you get stuck. So now this is a kasha, right? This should be a question. So again, why don't we use this pasuk to tell you that a Pesach Shalei Bizmani becomes an asham? Now really, of course, it cannot become an asham. You can only bring an asham for a sin. But here there's another detail. My friends, the Torah doesn't only write min. You know what the Torah writes? It says min hat sign. There is an extra hey. So min is lamayit. And if without the extra a, tell us here the commentators, Eino Chanami, and even Pesach, there's always going to be something that we are excluding. And Pesach has certain limitations. And if not for the hay, then a taka could have been a remes to an asham, which it's not. But don't forget there is a hay. So the hat tzoin has to include all types of tzoin. We are excluding the asham not from the min, but from the hay. Azoy taich from the Gemara. Says the Gemara still, we're not good yet. Hay sivun, like meisvein, v'hoksiv, another verse. Why don't we make the same drush over there? Ma'ato, why don't we say Moised Pesach ba'oila? Clearly, the pasuk says that's clear. That should be a remes lePesach. That if it is shaloi b'zmanoi, it should be la'oila. Answers the Gemara. Amar Abun. That where you have two verses. So we want to know, do we use the pasuk that we quoted above? Pesach Shalei Bizmani becomes a shlamim. Or whether we're going to use this pasuk, it's one or the other. So now we have to use our seichel to think to which one is it more similar to. So number one, Mishan and Davashul Achilam. When we have to change a carbon to another designation, it makes more sense to take a carbon which is the Pesach, which part of it is eaten. L'davar shu achila, which is a shlamim, some of the carbon is eaten even by the owners. Ve'ein mishavan davar shu achila, which is a Pesach, shaloi bizmanoi, l'davar she'ein achila at all. Oil is not even eaten by the kahanim. Another answer, Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Rebbe Bun. Mishalim kachem kalim, l'shem kachem kalim, right? Pesach kachem kalim, shlamim kachem kalim. Ve'ein mishalim kachem kalim, l'shem kachem. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yechanan Amar. I want you to know that al-da, Olil Rab Chanina, we're getting used to the lashon, right? On the following, did Rab Chanina challenge? What's on the following? The inu nominum again. We're speaking about challenges there. They loved it that day. In Bubble, they made certain statements, and when it came here, it was challenged. Over there, they say that what the a hapesach mishtana l'shem shlamim. In Bubble, they say that yes, there is a rule that Pesach shaloi l'shmana becomes a shlamim. But you know when? Not stam in the Veltanain. The only way it becomes a shlamim, that's what they say in Bubble, is ella im kein shechate l'shem shlamim. In other words, if you have a Pesach, shaloi b'zmanoi, and you shechted shaloi l'shmoi, that in itself is not good enough. You have to actually have in mind l'shem shlamim, and if you did not have in mind l'shem shlamim, then it's not going to be good. However, va'ani oimer, says Rabbi Chanina, we here in Eretz Yisrael, not like they say in Bubble, that afilu shechate l'shem oila, it also becomes a shlamim, which means if you shech the Pesach shaloi b'zmanoi stam, that's not good because you did not uproot it. You have to uproot it from its designation, but you don't have to designate it for a shlamim. Any machshava shaloi l'shmoi, any machshava is good to uproot it from a Pesach, and then the Torah says Pesach shaloi b'zmanoi becomes a shlamim. Omar Rab Ilah. That, and Rabbi Yechanan agrees with that. Talmud Rabbi Yechanan.
Rabbi, if you're shechting it out of the time of the Pesach, wouldn't that automatically mean it can't be a Pesach?
Oh, we know that it's not a Pesach. The question is it going to be a valid carbon for something, or is it completely invalidated? Don't forget that Pesach and Achatas, right? The first Mishnah and Zvachim, these are carbonis that if you shechted shaloi l'shmoi, Not only is it loy olam ba'olam l'shem chayva, but they are invalidated. Pesach bismanoi needs to be l'shmoi. If not, it's completely invalid. Pesach shaloi l'shmoi becomes a shlamim. Now we're going into the nuance. How does it become a shlamim? Machloikes. Is it that it becomes a shlamim only if you had the kavanah l'shem shlamim, or no? Any machshava that it's not l'shem Pesach is good. A machsheves shaloi l'shmoi shaloi bismanoi is gavaldik. I don't even care for what. Okay. Because it says, let's go back to the source. You know what we say? Kol shuhu zevach. Kol shuhu zevach means that for no matter what other zevach you had in mind, automatically bashlamim. Asks the Gemara, hold on. What will happen according to Rabbi Yechanan that we just said, according to Rabbi Chanina that we just said, that if I have in mind shaloi bizmanai l'shem oila, it becomes a shlamim. What happens if when I had in mind l'shem oila, I added a machshava that's not good? And the Gemara is going to give an example. If I had in mind l'shem oila, according to here in Eretz Yisrael, it's good, it becomes a shlamim, but I added a machshava that passes it. What will now be the din? Will we say, I don't care that you had a machshavas psul. I'm happy that you had in mind l'shem something other than the Pesach. So now you uprooted it from a Pesach and it becomes a shlamim. Or no, if you had in mind another psul, it will affect that this carbon is puzzle. And the Gemara clarifies, Heich avida. Heich avida means what exactly was done. What is the case of the question? Shechta l'shem oila. You shechta l'shem oila. Al menas lizrik dam l'machar. But you had in mind the machshavas pigul, machshavas pigul. I'm going to slaughter it. I'm going to sprinkle the blood tomorrow. Now, no carbon can have its blood sprinkled the day after the shechita. So, is it an oil or is it a shlamim? The Gemara says, who cares? If I had a machshavas pigul, no matter whether it's an oil or a shlamim, for sure it's not valid. So, what is your issue? Mikol makaim pasalu. So the Gemara says, I know that it's puzzle. My question is it pigul or is it puzzle? Now quickly, bekitzer. Machshavas shaloi lizmanoi, shaloi lizman, beyond the time, makes it pigul. Pigul means that if someone eats it afterwards, the chayiv kares. If you have another invalidating psul, even if there was also a machshavas pigul, it doesn't become pigul. It becomes puzzle and you're not allowed to eat it, but there's no kares. So that's the nafkamina. Answers the Gemara. In Tamar, if I will say that mishtana lemachshavas psul, that if I had in mind l'shem oila, but here I had in mind an oila and pigul, it will become an oila. So now you know what the din will be? The din will be that now we have to change the version. It's only going to be puzzle, because you know what a Pesach shaloi lizmanoi should be? It should be a shlamim. It becoming an oila is in itself something invalid. It should not have become an oila. So it's invalid because it became an oila. It's also connected to a machshavas pigul, but it's not only a pigul problem. So then it only becomes puzzle, ironically. But in payment, if you're going to say that ein mishtana l'machshavas psul, that even though I had in mind l'shem oila and pigul, but it remains a shlamim that's pigul, then it's going to be even worse. Then it's not going to be pigul. So that is my question for which there's no answer. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara. L'shmoi v'shaloi l'shmoi b'shadei ma'is hashana. When you shech this carbon Pesach, right? And when you begin to shech it, you have in mind l'shem Pesach. Now, a machsheves l'shmoi shaloi b'zmanoi invalidates it, right? Pesach b'shadei ma'is hashana. But during the same action of shchita, you then added another machshava shaloi l'shmoi. L'shem shlamim. So the question is, does a second machshava uproot the first one for the betterment, for the advantage of the carbon? Because the second machshava shaloi l'shmoi is good, but you also had a machshavas l'shmoi. So what's going to be the din? So Rabbi Bun bar Chia b'shem Shmuel bar Abba says, and we're going to go now with the version of the Gra. Go to the Zion. It's very important. B'kiven she'amar shaloi l'shmoi. The first, since at the end he fixed it by having in mind that the shechita itself should be shaloi l'shmoi. Let's say it means l'shem shlamim. What happens if in the beginning of the shechita you had nothing in mind? You had nothing in mind. You were silent. You did not verbalize any thoughts. Now, By a Pesach, what did we learn right now? A Pesach b'shari Yemos Hashana becomes a shlamim, you have to uproot it. If I begin to shecht it and I didn't yet uproot it, that's a problem. If I was silent, it's a problem. But if later, after my silence, I verbalized, shaloi l'shmai, so shaloi l'shmai has the koyach to uproot the invalidation that would have come about with a shtika. So just like a later thought can fix the initial shtika problem, so he says the same thing will be over here, even though you had an actually verbalized lishmai, which is problematic. But since you said lishmai and then you said shaloi lishmai, the latter statement can uproot the first statement just like it can uproot shtika, which is a chiddush. Shtika should be easier to uproot, but he doesn't make that difference. I just want to finish the Gemara. V'hu kasher. Now go back in the Gemara, you see by the hay. That is the answer of Rabbi Bun. However, Amar Lei or Amru Lei, in Yeshiva, they challenged him. Im kain, oy bazoi, afilu shechatoi shaloi lishmai. What happens if the shechita was done lishmai? Which is a problem, right? Because Pesach, b'shari Yemos Hashana, may not be done lishmai. And then, al menas lizroi damai shaloi lishmai. And you had in mind that by another step in the avodah, by the last step of the avodah, you'll do that shaloi l'shmai. If a latter intention has the power to uproot the first one, why don't we say that yasu mishah harishayne kishachtoi l'shmai uveshaloi l'shmai, and it should become kosher? But no one says that. No one says that. If we did the shchita l'shmai, which is a problem, b'shari Yemos Hashana, and then we said, but zrika I will do shaloi l'shmai, you didn't fix anything. But if a latter thought can uproot a previously negative thought, just like it uproots shtika, then it should be good here as well. So the Gemara says, how can you compare one case to the other? Omar Rebbe Abamari, we're skipping the parentheses, Man noimar b'shtika kashed, or noimar b'shtika pasul. He says, 1 second. He says, when you are having two thoughts by the same machshava, yes, shtika and l'shmai is the same. Shtika means it's for Pesach. L'shmai means for Pesach. A second thought can only uproot the first thought if you're having it during the same step in the avodah. So if you're shechting it either silent or l'shmai, but al manas lizrak damai shaloi l'shmai, of course it's not good because your upgrading thought was only regarding the zrika, not regarding the shchita. I'm speaking about a case where you shechted it lishmai v'shaloi lishmai. Yes, it's just like shechting it in the beginning silent, and then you shechted shaloi lishmai during the same step of the avodah. A latter thought, koyach of tshuva, a latter thought rectifies the prior thought, and that animal will become a proper kosher carbon. Shlamim chevra to be continued. Wow, guys, this is Azak Kachim Gemara. Wow. Guys, stay strong. We only have another week of this because, if I remember, towards the latter parts of Shekalim, we're going to have some Agadat.
Rabbi, Api Chasidus, what is this thing?
What is this thing? That Shaloi L'Shmai is a good thought. That Shaloi L'Shmai is a good thought. Api Chasidus, that even a Yid, that it does everything Shaloi L'Shmai, that's good. Because he has a Nefesh HaBahamis, you can't even get it, you cannot even motivate him correctly. I don't care. Hamaisu Hua Ikar. All right, we'll do.